Good evening. Hi, welcome. Thank you. A little worried about the 5 o'clock start time, but it looks like a great turnout. Thank you, every one of you, for coming. I'm super excited to talk to you about Agile development with Microsoft Visual Studio. I'm a product unit manager of Team Foundation Server in Redmond, and we're responsible for building the tooling for Agile software project management. So the subject is very near and dear to my heart, and so I'm really excited to be here. But before I go too far, I have to, in the spirit of true transparency, I need to admit something. I am a reformed Waterfallian. It's true. I'm sorry to admit that. I started at Microsoft in 1990. There's a picture of me in 1990, and some other things that were happening in 1990 that also look particularly dated. I think the University of Washington Huskies, currently at 0-7, shows that a lot has changed in the last 18 years. When I started at Microsoft, the software development methodology being used was very waterfall. So that's what I learned. You planned everything up front, and then you coded it up, and then you threw it over the wall. Testing did some stuff, and something finally came out. And you had a really short time to get some customer feedback before then releasing a product. So that, needless to say, is full of a lot of problems. So, in 1995, in particular, I was responsible for a particularly chaotic team. And every week, I would notice that everything would change. And when I say everything, I mean really everything. The feature list would change, the schedule would change, team members would change, people would change their minds. It was very chaotic. So in order to provide some sort of stability, I created a document, and here's a copy of one of them. I brought it. On one side, I put the feature list, and on the other side, I put the schedule. And I laminated it, and I gave one to everybody on the whole team. And my purpose was to say, we're going to stick to this plan. I'm going to freeze the change, and we're going to do what we said we were going to do. Well, can you guess what happened the next week? I had another version of the document laminated, and so on. So I had several of these running around, and I found that I really couldn't freeze the change that was happening. I did get myself a new nickname, though. Go figure. Not by design. I still hear it every once in a while. I learned from that experience that you could time box the schedule. That can be pretty stable. But the feature list needs to change because the customer needs are changing or the design is changing, and freezing it is really just counterproductive. So when Agile development started becoming popular, it was very exciting to me, really spoke to me, because I really saw a lot of these practices myself and learned from my experience that embracing that change, having an understanding of that common backlog that's socialized and communicated to the team, those things were lessons that were hard learned by me. And when Agile was coming around, that was just fabulous to see these practices adopted and acknowledged. And there's a lot of great things that I could go on and say. I love the iterative development with lots of feedback and the shorter cycles and the working code. There's a lot of great things about Agile development. But if I had to say what I think my favorite thing is, it's really the fact that the spirit of continual improvement, that these practices are things that you keep trying to make your team better and better at shipping software, and what interest that's brought to everyone, and how it's changed how we get our daily work done and how we deliver software. So there was a huge debate about practices versus tools, tools versus practices, and I think that's over now. It's not an either or, but really a both and. And that Agile, that if you have the right tools, they can actually accelerate the adoption of Agile practices. So Kent Beck recently wrote a paper called Tools for Agility, where he tried to map this out and show he selected a set of Agile practices as examples and a set of tools that support them, and showed the relationship between that these, how tools can really bring Agile practices to life. So what I want to do today is talk about several of these items and really talk about how the tools can really accelerate Agile development on your own software teams. The first one I want to talk about is test-driven development. Test-driven development is really a great practice, but some of the things that I really like about it is just the focus that it provides. That you focus on writing the test that says this is what is needed out of the software. Get very focused on that and then switch over, write the code, write the tests, and go back and forth. So what I'm going to do is show you what the enhancements in Visual Studio 2010 that support test-driven development. And to do so, I'm going to ask Sundar Raman, a program manager on my team, to come up and do a demo for us. So welcome, Sundar.
Thank you, Laurie. Hello, everyone.
And if you see anything you like, please, be friendly and applaud, right?
Yep. Thank you, Laurie. Hello, everyone. My name is Sundar Raman. I'm a program manager on Laurie's team, working on Team Foundation Server. Laurie just introduced one of the Agile practices, test-driven development, or TDD. As you all know, the principle here is that you write a failing automated test first before changing any code. When coding, it's easy to get carried away and put in code just in case. But by knowing what your design intentions are, you have more focus when you write the code. Also, when writing tests first, the next step is straightforward. You either add a new test or you make the broken test work. Now, let's take a look at how Visual Studio 2010 makes it easy for me to write my tests first. I'm going to use my red-green refactor approach to write my test first, run it red, implement my code, and then run my test green. What I have here is an ASP.NET web application that I'm working on using the Model View Controller framework. You can see it as a simple site. I just have the default home and about us pages. Now I want to add a new directions page. I want to take the user input for a street address and provide directions to our company store. I'm going to jump into my code here, and you can see that I'm in the middle of my cycle. I have a couple of unit tests that are already passing, and the solution for my application has two projects. One is my MVC project, which has the ASP.NET code, and the second is my unit test project. Now, I can get started implementing the direction controller for this new view that I want to add. Following my TDD cycle, the first thing I want to do is add a new unit test before I write any code.
So what are you thinking you're going to test here, Sundar?
That's a great question, Laurie. I have to think about what my code is supposed to do before I write my test case.
All right.
So in this controller, I want to verify that the input address is a valid US address, and then make sure that the page that is rendered is correct. I'm going to build this in increments, so this is the first increment that I want to build. I'm going to use the generated code here, jump into my test method. I'm going to switch to full screen so we can read this better. For this test case, I'm going to use a code snippet that I already wrote. So the first thing I want to do is instantiate my controller, call the new getDirection method that I want to add to this controller. I want to pass in a valid address, and finally verify that the title of the page is what I expect. Now, this is unit testing that you might have seen before, but the problem is I cannot run this test case and have it fail because my test code won't even compile. I have these red squiggles here that are telling me that this type could not be found, and I know it. I've not written it yet. So now I get to my new favorite feature in VS.
Well, in the past, now you'd have to go and switch over and write some code in your main application before you're even done writing your unit test.
Exactly. I'd have to switch to my code project, at least stub my code out, and then come back and finish my test case.
Yeah, which is pretty distracting if you ask me.
Yep. So now let's take a look at the new feature, control dot. I'm going to use the shortcut to open up the smart tag where I get options to create this class. The default option is going to create it in my current project, which is my unit test project. So I want to put this in my code project. I'm going to select Generate Other, change the project location to my MVC project. And I see a couple of things happening here. In my Solution Explorer, I see my direction controller file was created and added to my MVC project. And the red squiggles in my test case are now gone, and it's colorized as a type.
So it created the class for you in your main code project.
Exactly.
Great.
And I'm still within the context of my test case. So I'm going to do the same for view result. I'm going to use control dot. And this time, it's recognized as a type in the MVC framework that I'm referencing. So I get the option to add the missing using directive. The using directive gets added to the top of this file. And finally, for my get direction method, I use the magic control dot again.
Yeah, I think I'd use that everywhere.
The new red squiggle option.
Yeah.
I get an option to create the stub for this case, for this method. So now I'm done writing my test case, and I didn't have to switch context. I could focus on my task at hand. The first thing I want to do here is run my test case. So I'm going to right-click on my code and run the new test case that I added. I expect this test case to fail because I've not implemented my type yet. I can see in my test result window that this test failed as I expected. Now guess what the next step that I want to take is. I want to be able to double-click on my test result and go to the code that caused this test case to fail. There you have it.
So we've heard lots of feedback that double-click was taking you to test results, and we listened and we heard that, and in 2010, double-clicking on a test failure will take you to the code that caused the test to fail.
Yep. So I can see that this is the code that was generated when I used control dot from my test case.
So that's your main project?
This is in my code project, yes.
Okay.
So I'm going to instantiate my controller here. The first thing I want to do is inherit from controller. I get the red squiggle again.
What are you going to do?
Control dot. So I get the option to add the using directive. I can see the using directive gets added to the top of this file. And now I can implement my get direction method. Again, I'm going to use a code snippet that I already wrote for this. In this method, I want to verify that the input string matches the pattern for a valid US address. I've already defined my pattern here, and I'm using regular expressions to verify that it matches the input string matches this pattern. And finally, if it does, I want to set the title to a specific string. I'm done writing my code. I'm going to exit out of full screen here. Now I want to rerun my failed test. I'm going to use Control R and hit the F key to rerun the failed test that was in my test result window. This time I expect my test case to pass. That is, go from red to green. I can see that my test case passed. The next thing I want to do is that I've been coding for a while, so I want to quickly rerun all my tests that are in this unit test project to verify that I did not break any of the existing functionality. I'm going to use Control R and hit the A key to include the existing cases that I had and rerun the new test that I implemented. I want to verify that my existing functionality is still intact. I can see that I'm green across the board now.
All right, are you ready to check in?
Not quite yet. I just want to make one refactoring change. Switch back to full screen mode. I'm beginning to think that my get direction method is starting to get a little smelly. I want to reuse my address verification code from another place in my project. So I'm going to select these lines of code, right-click, pick the refactor option, and I'm going to use extract method.
There's a lot more options in there now.
Yes, we've been adding on more refactoring options to this. I'm going to use extract method. There you have it. My address verification code has now been extracted to a new method It returns the Boolean type as I would expect. And this method is called from my getDirection method. And it's smart enough to figure out the input parameter that needs to be validated. I'm going to get out of my full screen again. Now, I want to rerun my tests to verify that my refactoring change didn't break anything. I'm going to use Control-R and hit the A key again.
So again, we've heard that refactoring is a really useful practice. So we are continuing to enhance our support for refactoring. There's more in Visual Studio 2010 and more coming after that.
There you have it. All my tests are passing. So this is TDD in action. I was able to write my test first, run it red. I was able to use Control dot to create the necessary stubs without leaving the context of my test case, implement my code, and then run my test green. So when I made a refactoring change, I was able to quickly rerun the test to verify the functionality.
Great, thanks, Sundar.
Yep.
So test-driven development, I think that we've heard loud and clear that it's very productive to focus on writing your tests and being able to get those running, failing, going back and forth, and really write incremental batches of code and have that full transparency early in the cycle. Another practice I want to talk about is continuous integration. True to the spirit of keeping quality in the product early is keeping that main code stream nice and clean. And continuous integration has been a great innovation to make sure that any errors are caught as early as possible by kicking off builds as soon as check-ins are made. But this can be pretty difficult in teams that are very large or very distributed with concurrent check-ins happening. Your build can often not get the benefits that you see from continuous integration. So while Sundar's still up here, I'm going to have him show you some of the enhancements we've made in Visual Studio 2010 to extend continuous integration to work in these large-scale distributed team environments. So here you go again.
In developing software, the integration step is unpredictable. And this step can easily take more time than the coding itself. The longer you wait to integrate your changes, the more expensive it gets. One of the great practices that extreme programming introduced was continuous integration, or CI. The most common approach to CI is asynchronous. I check in my change, and my build system picks up my check-in and triggers an automated build. And I get notified if there are any issues with a build. So now let's take a look at how we enable CI in TFS. I have my solution checked into source control on Team Foundation server. In my last demo, you saw me write my code and my unit test. Now I can right-click on my solution and pick the check-in option. I'm going to add a comment here. I see my code and my unit test listed alongside. I can even associate this with my work item. And now I'm ready to submit this as a single check-in.
So what you see is your code and your tests and the purpose that the code and test all associated in one change set. So as you're looking at your builds, you can know what's in the build.
Exactly. So I've already enabled CI builds on this team project. And the way I did it was by using Team Explorer, editing my build definition, and setting the trigger to a check-in build. That is, every change that is submitted to the system triggers a build. I can also double-click on my build definition, look at the queued tab, and I see that the check-in that I just made triggered a build. This is CI. I was able to submit my change, and my build system automatically queues up a build for me. And here comes my nifty new Trade application that is notifying that the build was started. So the next thing I want to do is protect the quality of my builds. I don't want to have build breaks all the time. I wrote a bunch of unit tests. I want to be able to use these unit tests and share it with my team members. So we run the unit test before we check in any code changes. And the way we do this in TFS is using check-in policies. I can select my team project settings, go into my source control settings, and add a testing policy. I'm going to browse for my solution here within my code tree, pick the test metadata file, and use the BVT test list, or the build verification test list, that has the same unit test that I just wrote. So from here on, if me or someone on my team makes a code change, I'm going to just add a couple of summary comments here. And we do not run the unit test, but try to check in this change. I get a policy failure. I can see the message here telling me that I did not run my check-in test after I made the code change. So this works great, but say I'm part of a team, and say my team is distributed, as I'm sure many of yours are. I'm sitting here on the West Coast. I've been coding all day. I've run my check-in test, and I've verified that I satisfy my policies, and I'm ready to check in my changes. But my teammate in China made some change and checked it in before I did, so I'm going to break the build when I check in my change. Now let's take a look at how we extend CI in TFS using gated check-in to ensure that people are not stomping on each other with their changes. I'm going to edit my build definition here again. And this time, I'm going to change my trigger from a check-in build to a gated check-in. This is going to block my check-in till it successfully builds with the rest of the code. I'm going to also edit my process and pick a list of tests that need to be run. Browse for my solution here again. Take the same test metadata file and run the list of tests. Now, these tests need to pass on a staged build that is built with my changes, and they need to pass before my change is committed. So go ahead and save that. Now, I'm going to switch my hats a bit. I'm going to be a team member on my team, exit out of this instance, and use a different instance of Visual Studio. I'm going to open up my solution, and we are going through a code cleanup process. So we are documenting all our methods so we can extract the Visual Studio documentation out of it. I'm going to pull up my direction controller. And add summary comments to my verify address method. So I can see that we've enabled check-in policies on this team project. So I get this warning telling me that I did not run them. So I'm going to rerun the test. So I'm pretty sure that my summary comments is not going to break anything. I just want to double check. You can see my tests are executing. And I'm passing all the existing tests. So now I'm ready to check this code in. I'm going to pull up my pending changes window, and I get this policy tab telling me that my check-in policies are now satisfied, so I can submit this change. I've enabled gated check-in for this team project. So I get this gated check-in dialog telling me that my changes need to be verified. So my changes are shelved and built with the rest of the code to verify that it builds before my change is committed. I'm going to click continue, and that's all I had to do. The rest of the process is automated. I just check in my change. My build system is going to run the build, verify the tests, and then check in my changes if they succeed. So while my build is going on, Laurie is going to show us what's going on here behind the scenes.
All right, so Cinder just showed us, he checked in his code, and what we're doing behind the scenes is we're intercepting that check-in and taking a shelf set, and then you see the dialogue that he showed you saying, hey, this is a gated check-in, we need to validate this before it goes through. We then queue up a build of that shelf set, no, that was a tongue twister. And then we build that remotely. We get the sources from the main code stream. We merge that shelf set Geez, is it 5:30 or what? We compile, and then we run the tests or anything else you have as part of your build automation. Through that period of time, we pull the build status and tell you that your build is in progress. If at any point during that time the build fails, we'll copy that drop, give you that shelf set, and we'll give you a notification saying your check-in's been rejected and because the build failed or the test failed. If it succeeds, then we will pull the build status and we'll see and we'll give you a message letting you know that your check-in has then been committed and integrated into the made code stream.
And the last step of the process is where my gated check-in should be now, but I see that it's still going. So we've seen how we enable CI in TFS, and I showed you how we can pull the unit test forward using check-in policies to protect the quality of your builds. And we've also seen how we can extend CI using gated check-in. The next thing I want to show you is all the cool new reporting work we have done for you to get a holistic view of this process. So my build just completed. Now I can double-click on my build result and pull up a detailed build report.
Now that looks a lot better than the one in 2008.
Exactly. Using one of the previous versions, you'll notice that we've completely revamped this report. We made it more streamlined and easy to use. I can easily see that my build was successful. I can assign an initial quality to this build right from within my report. I get a nice visual indication of the quality of my last 10 builds. The height of each of these bars indicates the amount of time my build ran for, and the color indicates the status. So I can see that my most recent check-in build ran for about 94 seconds, and it was successful. I can walk down this list and see that this build ran for about 3.5 minutes, but it failed. We also give you a nice highlights with the summary section, including the errors and warnings and your test run results.
That's nice. You don't have to dig through the log file to go get those.
Exactly. You no longer have to dig through the raw MS build output to find your errors and warnings. But of course, you can still get them, and we provide a link right in the report. The other thing that we've also done is greatly improve our log that we generate. We moved away from the flat list that we had before into a hierarchical log. We enable complex build workflows with our integration with Windows Workflow Foundation. So the flat list doesn't cut it anymore. I also get this nice mini map on the left that I can use to navigate this log.
I love that mini map.
I love it as well. It even highlights my errors and warnings.
Oh, so you can see it right there in the mini map, and you can go right to it.
Exactly. So you can see that our new build report is easy to read, and you can dig into the details if you want. This is for a single build. Now, say I wanted to look at the build report for a previous build. I can click on one of these bars to go back to the detailed build report for that specific build.
Nice.
Now, I can also get my build quality over a period of time. We've added a whole bunch of new reports, and for this case, I'm going to pull up my build success over time report. As we run through the build process, we collect metrics like code churn, the test results, and my build quality, and we pump this data into our warehouse so we can report off of it. So you can see my new report automatically defaults to about a month, the last month. I can set filters to drill in. I get a nice heat map of the build quality for the last month at a day level granularity across my build definitions, the different platforms I'm running the build against, and the configurations.
I got to tell you, Sundar, you got a lot of yellow in that report there.
Yes, the yellow blocks are telling me that my build was successful, but I did not have any tests associated with the build. This was, of course, before we enabled the BVT. You can see that now I have a light green square where my tests are passing, but I'm still not doing so well on the code coverage. This is one of the many reports that we have introduced in Visual Studio 2010. I can also pull up my reports for my bugs, project management, and a whole bunch for the test cases as well.
You know, I look at those reports a lot of times, and it's really hard for me to understand what the report is for.
And we've heard that feedback. So to make it easy, we've included the questions that each of these reports help answer right within the report. So my build success over time report helps me answer questions like, how high is the quality of the build? Is the quality rising, falling, or staying constant? So you can see that I can use this to tell we were not even starting to run builds till about the 2nd of October, and we didn't do so great after that either. But now we're getting better at running the builds more regularly. The other thing that comes up frequently is related questions when you're looking at data like this. So we've also included links to related reports that you can look at. I'm going to pull up my build quality indicator report. I already have this running. So I'm going to just switch to that window. And in this case, you can see the active bug count, the trend for it over the last several builds.
So clearly, just having your builds work and your tests pass isn't the whole story.
Exactly. My last report was telling me that we're getting better at running the builds more often, but this is telling me a different story. Though we are getting more builds out and we even have unit tests on them, my active bug count has actually gone up over the last several builds. I wonder if my team is actually doing any work.
Some coacher in there.
Yeah, that's positive.
A red line.
So we've seen how we enable CI in TFS, how we can extend CI using gated check-in, and all this great transparency using the new reports. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sundar. So Sundar showed how he could really pull those tests forward to be not just unit tests that you run personally, but ones that can be run before people check in, and then ones that are run as part of the build process before your check-in is actually integrated into the main code stream, really extending continuous integration. But testing isn't the only way you can extend that build process. You can also run code analysis as part of that, or new with Visual Studio 2010, you can validate your architecture as part of check-in policy or as part of gated check-in. So we're not going to show that in this session, but there's one coming up on Wednesday, Architecture Without Big Design Up Front by Peter Provost. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, I suggest checking that out. So we've talked a lot so far about XMXP practices and how Visual Studio has brought those to life. But I also want to spend some time talking about Scrum. There's been some great new practices introduced by Scrum. Talk to you about how the product backlog is obviously near and dear to my heart. But I think the concept of burn down is just super motivating to be able to keep the team focused and know what that remaining work is. And transparency also is another huge benefit so that you can know what your team's working on, better collaborate, and better understand the issues earlier in the cycle. So what I want to do now is show you one of the real problems in Agile project management is just the scheduling and planning. It can be very hard to run your scrums, and especially if your team is large or your team is distributed. So I'm going to show you some of the enhancements that we have in Visual Studio 2010 to help with that. And it's me this time, so I'm up here. Okay, let me close some of this stuff out. I'm going to start as the product owner, and I want to look at my product backlog. Told you I love the product backlog. Here it is. Instead of it being laminated, it's my nice list of user stories here in TFS. So everybody on the team can see it. If I make changes, we know we have one common product backlog. As a team member, I'm on the work in the current iteration. So let's look at the work in the iteration backlog. Here's the iteration backlog, and it's got all the user stories and their associated tasks. You may notice that this is hierarchical work items in Team Foundation Server. So I can easily expand and collapse and see the breakdown of the user stories and their tasks. As a developer, I can go in here and, let's see, I want to go and update some of my tasks. So let me go ahead and do that. And we've simplified the Agile work item forms so that There's much less fields, and the key things that you need are right here on the main page. So I can go ahead and say, I don't even remember what I put there. Let's just put 0, and completed is 33. So simple to go ahead and update my tasks. Also, when I see that maybe this task is bigger than I thought, pretty easy for me to go ahead and break that down into even more work items. So this is a new child right within Visual Studio. And it's asking me to do some original estimates and remaining and save that. So if I refresh that query, you should be able to see, collapse this, open up the SMS message, open this up, and you should see that I created that new child task right there. So really simple to be able to do even further task breakdown right from within Visual Studio. And if I realize that this is really part of a different user story, just dragging and dropping right within Visual Studio, you can change the work context. So let me save all those changes. The big value I get out of here is that everybody knows the work context. I understand how my task relates to what user story I'm trying to fulfill. I can also make changes to that or break down work further and certainly provide updates, all without having to leave Visual Studio. So now it's time to run my daily scrum. Now, I recognize that the most popular project management tool for Agile project management is Excel. So what we've done is we've made Excel even better because we've made it work off of live data. We have some new workbooks with Visual Studio Team System 2010 that help me with my project management. I'm going to show you one of them, and it's the iteration backlog. I've opened it up already, so I didn't see all the security warnings that happen when I open up Excel for the first time. And this should look familiar. It's that same query I just showed you, the user stories and their associated tasks. And I can see how that work breakdowns, and it's a nice tree here in Excel. And I can make changes to the hierarchy simply by dragging and dropping and create children of parents, or just like I was showing you earlier, I can create a new child, it'll create a new row there, and I can add that task there. So real simple right there, be able to, in my Scrum meeting, be able to break down a user story a little bit further or provide updates and really understand how the work comes together to fulfill my user stories. So I'm about to run my daily Scrum. The first thing I want to do is get updates from the people who've been doing work all over the world. And to do that, I'm going to refresh this spreadsheet. With Visual Studio in the past, when you did this, see all this pretty formatting? I love my active bugs red, and I really have some nice bars here to show me progress. These come with the sheet, or I can create my own. And in the past, when I would refresh it, they'd all get cleared. But now with Visual Studio 2010, we're going to go ahead and refresh the data, get all the updates from the team members all over the world. And what you'll see is that the formulas and formats are preserved. Yay! Thank you. Yeah, this one is a big lifesaver for me personally. So I can see all these new tasks and the new child tasks I created. So all the hierarchy comes right in here. It's persisted throughout in TFS and comes right into Excel. So I can go and see how all my various team members are doing on their work items. And notice I've got a lot of active work here, so I'm a little worried about how we're doing. Let's check out the burn down. We have a burn down tab right as part of this workbook that comes in Visual Studio 2010. And with this burn down, let's see what happens here. This has been a little bit flaky lately. So what we do is we take the planned work and the remaining work. Here you go. It's live software, everybody. That was just to prove it to you. So what we do is we take the remaining work and burn that down and have a nice chart over. The dark red is the planned work. The lighter color is the remaining work burning down over time. And we plot that, and we give you a little trend line showing what you're doing and how you're burning it down. We can also plot you a trend line according to when you want to start, showing your ideal trend. In this case, the black line is showing me what I need to be doing in order to burn down my work in order to meet my goals. So I've got some work to do here. I can see that we started out real well, and then we kind of flattened out, and then there was this big, huge spike in work. So I've got a couple of problems here, a scope problem and probably a velocity problem. Let's check out the velocity in a little more detail. We have a tab on the velocity, and in this case, I do see we're calculating how you're doing on your current velocity, and it's pretty low. And the required velocity is significant, so I can see right here that we need to step it up big time. So let's go back and get some work assignments assigned to people on the team. As people are pulling off tasks for the next day, we're going to do better at our burn down. I want to see how this affects, how people are loading up themselves in their work. So one of the interesting things we have is capacity planning. What this does is it goes and looks at the velocity we had in the previous iteration, and based on my dates for the iteration, it'll calculate the expected capacity for the current iteration. So I can see if I have too much work loaded up in this iteration immediately. I also have the option to include any out of office that I expect for my team. And what it does is I showed you, it'll show me the iteration capacity that's expected and what's currently assigned. And it'll show me how allocated my various team members are based on the tasks they've picked up. So this doesn't look too bad here. But this is live, and if it'll let me edit it, we'll see how it does. I can go and create some assignments and go, and we're just going to go, and Apurva is going to take a lot of work now. And by making that change, I should see the immediate impact right here in my capacity planning. So now Apurva is in a world of hurt and overloaded. So this is really helpful as people are just taking their tasks off the backlog to be able to see that they haven't taken on too much at a quick glance and make those adjustments right in the daily scrum and not wait until the next day to find out that maybe we need to spread this out a little bit more. So what I've just shown you is how you can run your daily scrum based on live data hooked into TFS and really get that working for your distributed team. So now it's time to run a retrospective. My team, that scope problem I was talking to you about, well, that came up loud and clear in the retrospective. So I'm going to take a look at all the work that we had planned and we did in this iteration. So that's a simple query, and it's my people that it's assigned to, and I have all the original estimates here. And we had the scope creep, and the scope creep was really reflected in those original estimates increasing over time. Well, when running the query, I can just see what they ended up at, and I can't really see how it got to an increased estimate. So what I'd like to do is understand how the original estimates changed on a historical basis. So I'm clicking on this to create a report in Excel. And in the past, what I'd have to do is I would have to go get a developer to go write me a report that uses reporting services and goes and talks to the warehouse that shows me how my original estimates changed over time. But now, what we've done with that create report from Excel, I have this option where I can generate some current reports or trend reports. I wanted a trend, and I wanted it on the original estimate. We take all the fields that you had in that query and the columns that you showed in your query results, and we translate that into something that the cube can understand and hook up this Excel workbook with the cube as a data source. We pull in all those fields, and we generate several pivot tables and pivot charts to go with them to help me navigate the data. And I have a nice table of contents to tell me what happened. So let's see what kind of things got generated here. I can see my original estimates increasing, and this one is sliced by stack rank, and the unknown stack rank seems to be spiking here. And I can also see it by priority, where I can see the Pri 1 work is the one that spiked, and I also can see it by assigned to. So what this does, it allows me, and I think I even clicked on this and I showed you that the cube is all hooked up here. So I have the full set of fields available to me, so I can really start slicing and dicing my data by pulling in data from the Visual Studio Team System. So this is so much easier for me to get access to that historical data, run a great retrospective, and understand what's happening on my team. Rocket. All right, so that was a lot of stuff going on. Let me tell you what's happening behind the scenes in order to make it happen. We got team members up there getting their work done, and they're checking in code, and they're updating work items, and they're running tests, and we're pulling all this information, test results, builds, work item updates, all into our various databases in Visual Studio Team System. I showed you our iteration backlog workbook, dipping right into that and pulling the live data right out to show it to you in Excel. In the background, we have adapters running, and they're taking snapshots of the data every day and as it changes and pumping it into the warehouse. We have a cube on top of that warehouse to help you with your reports. Now with Visual Studio 2010, we've opened up the relational warehouse so that you can write reports using T-SQL if you choose. That was a huge request. We heard your feedback, and now it's open. You can, of course, continue to write your reporting services reports on current data and on trends, as you have with previous versions of Visual Studio Team System. And I showed you how we jumpstart you and hook you in with Excel with the cube as a data source and help generate reports from queries or help you slice and dice for further analysis. All right. So we've seen a lot of things that have helped bring Agile practices to life. But I know there's several of you out there who are probably wondering, oh, you know, but don't make me let go of my yellow stickies. I love my yellow stickies. Well, we've got some great community support and enhancements building on top of Visual Studio Team System. And today we have Kachango here to show you their task board. So I'm going to have Colin Bird and Simon Bennett come up and show you this great new task board. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Simon from Kachango, and we were recently bought by EMC in April, so we're now global. We're a UK-based consultancy. And my glamorous assistant here is Colin Bird. So who here is still on 2008?
Everybody?
Everybody? Who's still on 2005 or has some projects on 2005? The good news is that what we're going to show you today runs on 2005 and 2008. So we hear a lot about 2010, and I can't wait to get to it because it looks fantastic. But this is our solution at the moment for 2008. So if we've switched up. So we've been building tools to work with Agile teams, and specifically Scrum teams, since about 2005, where we were originally working with Ken Schwaber, who's one of the kind of forefathers of Scrum. And one of the big issues is trying to get the tooling in and trying to get teams to do the right kind of Agile thing. So our very first process template was for 2005. We've recently updated it for 2008. And this is our task board for Team System, which is the first in a whole suite of visually oriented tools which allow you to graphically visualize and manipulate TFS work item data. So this is all the stuff that's in TFS, in Excel, and it's visualized in the format that a lot of teams that are just using task boards work with. So if you can have a look down the left-hand side, you've got all your product backlog items. You can scale, as we see before. You can mouse over and get all the details. So you can actually clip over there. You can get the detailed descriptions. You can get all the unit tests. You can get the business priority, the delivery order, the story points, and each of the status. So if you notice on each of these cards, there's an icon. And the icons basically move it through the typical kind of Scrum board statuses of not started, in progress, ready for test, done. So the task board has two modes. one for managing your sprint, and one for planning, so that you actually create up and do it round the task board. So you can actually do your sprint planning from the task board, and it will create all the work items. So what it does here is it presents this hierarchical view of the flat structure you have in 2008 and 2005. So as you can see in the swim lane columns, all of the associated sprint tasks that go with these boards, with the product backlog items, line across there. So the biggest thing in Scrum is you want to lower the friction for people updating their work, because you want that data, just like Laurie said, at the daily Scrum, you've got to have the up-to-date data. So when a team member starts a task, they simply pick it up from the card, and then they can just drag it over. Again, if they want to get more detail, they can just mouse over it. When they've taken a card, again for distributed teams, they can pick from anyone in the actual team. So one of the things we define is multiple teams. So you could have, say, 3 teams, one in the US, one in China, one in India. And if you have a look right up the task board, if Colin will remove the mouse over, you can actually filter via looking at all of the teams at once, or you can filter down via a per team view. So depending on your view, if you were the program manager for that, you could look at what was happening to the entire project. If you were the local Scrum Master, you could say, I just want to look at what's happening with the Chinese team or the Indian team. There's an enormous amount of filters, which we won't go through here, but you can actually go through and look at that sort of stuff. You can even filter on particular text as well. So if you have a particular standard, you can filter on that sort of style. So one of the other things, if you have a look over here, is there's 2 figures. One's the work remaining hours, and one is the actual complexity in story points. So it's very easy, again, to burn down the hours on the tasks. So if you just go to a task, you right-click on, say, an in-progress task, you can just literally update the work remaining on that task down to 3 hours. And what will happen is there's an event service in the background, and it will add up all the remaining tasks and update the product backlog item automatically. When you move all of your tasks through to done, again, that piece of work is marked as done. So there's a lot of automated stuff going on in the background. Just quickly show you that you can flick into planning mode as well. Planning mode just basically adds a few other things. It gives you the ability to add new product backlog items, raise new bugs, and it also gives you the ability to defer work. There's a load more features we have in this. We've only got a short amount of time here, but we'll be around for the whole conference. And so anyone that's interested in finding out what more you can do in terms of the filtering, how to descope work, how it actually works back, can come and contact us.
And this is available today, working on Visual Studio 2005.
It's available on 2005 and 2008. We'd recommend you have at least 2008. It's built on all of the standard extensibility platforms in terms of TFS. It actually calls back to the Scrum for Team system template, and it works in with the reporting services, all that sort of stuff. There's also an event service which goes and does all the moving things. So again, if you move a product backlog item from one sprint to another sprint, it'll actually go and find all of the associated tasks and move the iteration path for those things. So you can do those macro level things that you built into 2010. You can do them today using the task board.
Great. So. Thank you so much. That task board UI is pretty great. I've been talking a lot about transparency here, and I have got to show you something that I'm really excited about here. It's not logging onto this machine, but we've talked a lot about transparency, and a lot of people interested in the project don't really want to go and look in Excel spreadsheets or run Visual Studio queries to see what's going on. So this is hot off the presses. This is back in Redmond. I'm terminal serving in, so cross your fingers. Here's our dashboards with our Agile workbooks. You can see I'm looking at the work progress dashboard where I have a nice team velocity thing. That same burn down chart you saw in Excel right here on my dashboard. And here's the stories overview report where I can see a lot of great information, not just the burn down in terms of hours or percent complete or remaining, but also the quality, the test pass results, the number of bugs per user story. So a great overview right there on the home page of how my project is progressing. I talked to you about my team having a velocity problem. Well, it's really simple for me to drill into that right from here, and that's not what I wanted to do, but let me try it again. We have many of those web parts are simple Excel reports available to you and will be shipped as part of the product. So let me exit out of this, exit edit mode, and go back to my reports. And I should see a list of all those reports. And a ton of them are right there. So I can go right in here into that velocity and edit that in Microsoft Excel. And there you go. It's pulling up the report. And I can now analyze the data even further right from here. When I do that, and I find that a good information, like maybe I want to focus, that's the security warning. Let's make sure everybody's okay with us. And I want to look at the current iteration instead, and I've changed that report. It's really simple to go ahead and update my dashboard and say, hey everybody, let's focus on velocity in our current iteration by using Excel services in MOS and just publishing that right there. If I overwrite this report, it'll go and update it right on that main homepage of my dashboard. So there's the report rendering. Let me close everything out, clear that IE cache, and let's bring up that home page again. And you should see that new data reflected right on the front page of my dashboard. So the point here is that it's really easy to be able to go ahead and communicate broadly to stakeholders and team members as well with some very powerful dashboards that we have. I showed you some of and they're really super easy to customize. And we've also integrated the web client right in here so that I can go ahead and do everything that you've seen from Team System Web Access, query on work items, update work items, etc., all integrated in one portal. Pretty good. Good stuff. I just can't resist showing that. I'm very excited about the dashboards. So I've shown you a lot of practices here. I've shown you how Visual Studio 2010 is just really great for Agile development. And we've been using it ourselves as well. We've been using it internally since April 2007 in order to accelerate the adoption of our own Agile practices internally. We really wanted to make sure we had working software, so we had productive teams, and we could iterate more frequently with our customers, make sure we didn't build any sort of test debt and test it throughout, and have visibility across all the features. So what we did is we created a new concept called feature crews that really brought us down to small teams. They're about the size, the target is about 7, cross-functional teams working together, their own burn downs, their own backlogs. And in order to integrate into the main code stream, they have to finish up a done list. And one of the items on the list is to make sure code coverage is high so that you are building your tests as you're writing your code. But with all these feature crews in flight, that visibility into all the feature crews is even more important. Here's the list of all the feature crews currently in flight for Team Foundation Server. This report was pulled last week. So it's pretty fresh data, so you can see what we're working on if you can read the tiny font. But the green bars show the percent complete. Light green is percent complete in the last week. Red is the remaining work in absolute hours. So we can do a quick look here, circling things like, oh, the end date is coming or past and your remaining work is still large. And this helps drive our meeting that we have every week, which is the Scrum of Scrums, to watch everybody's burn down. So with all this metrics that we're collecting from our own data warehouse, it really helps us drive and drill down on the right issues. You also see some things highlighted red and yellow. Those are from the teams. They've highlighted their own work, red and yellow, as something that they want to raise an issue or a risk or a big problem as part of that meeting. So it really helps generate some good understanding and focus on the critical issues and provide course corrections or help right there. So, as you've seen, Visual Studio 2010 is really great for Agile teams. We heard you, we heard the criticism, we heard the feedback, and we've incorporated that into the new versions of Visual Studio. We've got a great product, and it's much improved, And Visual Studio 2010 really helps with Agile development. We use it ourselves, and I can tell you firsthand it helps, and you can use it too. Thank you.